Okay, hello, good afternoon everybody. I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and try and bring together some of what we've heard this morning together with what we've heard this afternoon. Not just with regards to renewables, but the broader issues of sustainability, and I'm going to do that in three ways. First of all, I'll have a brief introduction. That's going to be followed by the latest survey. I don't know if anybody's aware that the VFM and the University of Reading undertake an annual survey of the facilities management market to look at sustainability and trends within the market itself. Anybody aware of that? Quick show of hands? No? Oh, thank you very much, one or two people. So a look at what is that telling us, and then finishing up with what does that mean for the future. And if you're all expecting an answer for that, I'm not going to be able to give you one because I think it's a matter of each to their own, as we've already seen. But starting off, this is a look at it's corporate social responsibility, but sustainability is contained within that. And these figures go from 1992 through to 2010, where we've seen a consistent growth in the level of reports produced from the 26 that were initially done way back in the 1990s. Anybody here's organisation doesn't produce a CSR report? It's probably the easiest way of putting it. Again, we can be interactive. Well, okay, there's one there. Please do feel free to interact. So we've seen a massive rise in the number of reports. Probably more telling is what they're actually saying. And this is looking at the detail. Very much dominated by mining and extraction industries when it started. Was very environment dominated. We now in 2010 have a rainbow of colours. Whole host of different definitions for how organisations see corporate social responsibility, which we also mustn't forget is a voluntary activity. This is something the organisation does because it wants to. Having said that, it's not always that clear, and there are four drivers, which the first one I'm going to bring up is the legal driver, but is that not a bit of an oxymoron as far as something that's voluntary goes? I don't know if anybody took part in the greenhouse gas consultation earlier in the year. There was another one then where they're looking for mandatory greenhouse gas reporting, and the first option was to do it on a voluntary basis. And I did struggle to see how that was ever going to work as an option. But 62% of FTSE All-Share are reporting on carbon emissions anyway. One of the comments that came out of this morning was, but how do we benchmark it? And the answer to that is it's almost impossible. There's 35, 40 different ways of measuring carbon footprint. And you could almost pick one. If you'd set yourself some objectives, you could almost pick one of those to actually meet what you wanted to do. How standardised, how referenceable is that for when you're looking at stakeholders and what you're actually performing on? Second one is the financial incentive, as far as CSR goes. Third one is the moral perspective. And the last one's down to image, and all four are applicable. I don't know if anybody disagree with that, or anybody want to add anything into that. They tend to be the four mainstays of why we have CSR today. Particularly that one and that one now tend to be driving. One of the comments made this morning talked about the legal aspects of it and why the legal aspects aren't really relevant anymore. I would disagree with that, and I've got one or two examples a little later of why that is the case. So that's where we go as far as CSR sustainability is. Looking now at the annual VFM Sustainability Survey, for those that aren't aware of it, it's in its fifth year. It's been now running for 5 years, and effectively it's canvassing the views and responses of those people at the operational end of sustainability management. These are the facilities managers or the building services managers. You may be one of them yourself. I'm certain you know them within your organisation, who are actually delivering this on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you look at the broad definitions of corporate social responsibility, business in the community identify as workplace, marketplace, environment, and community. And it's very much about the environment and workplace aspects, which in most organisations have some kind of facilities management input. Looks at each year's data in isolation and then combines them all to see where trends are occurring and therefore what that is telling us about how sustainability is being seen from an operational stroke tactical level. And in 2011, the report's about 40 pages long. It hasn't been released yet, so this is a little bit of a preview for yourselves. 15 aspects under 3 major headings, which were policy uptake and barriers associated with sustainability in the organisation, responsibility and performance, and I've really just cherry-picked one or two of the changes within that. First one is aspects covered in policy. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to what the top 2 or 3 may have been in organisation sustainability policy? So, well, I'll give you energy as a starter, might be there. The other thing we're talking about again is waste. Anything else? Water, okay, that's very good. That's an interesting point, actually, and we'll come and look at that in a little bit more detail. Anything else?
Legal compliance.
Okay, thank you. Any more? Are we going to stick at those? We've got 2 of the top 4. Top of the shop is waste and recycling, followed by energy. Next one was carbon footprint, and the 4th one was health and safety, actually reflecting is quite a broad church. Training and development comes under that, and then we've got water, and they start to drop relatively into insignificance right the way down to the bottom of the shop, which is biodiversity. So that's what 2011 looked like, bearing in mind we're at the end of or hopefully, touch wood, at the end of a recessionary period, unless we talk ourselves into a double dip. That's where specification of sustainable products and services lies. So from an end user perspective, how important is it seen? Argument there compared to some other things, not very. Why might that be? Could it be because we're talking about end users and most of this technology is seen as the domain of your designer or your constructor? Paradox we have there is that if you look at design, construct and operate, the first 2 cover about 2%, 2 to 4% at any one time of the buildings we have in the UK. The remainder of that is all operational. It's what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. By 2050, when we're looking at 80% reductions, 60% of the buildings you were going past today will still be there. So what do we need to do about those? Just a thought. What about responsibility within that? Again, the top 4 or the top 3 reflected pretty much year on year. They tend to have been standardised. Person who mentioned water is quite interesting because that's come straight in at number 4 and actually above carbon footprint. So that seems to have dropped in significance, yet we're having a consultation on it at the moment as to what we're going to do with regards to our carbon footprint then. But it's not just water, we've also seen building refurbishment, pollution and staff well-being. All of those are first-time entries. So in 5 years, this is the first time any of those has come up. Now you could argue some of that directly is reflected by legislation. We've seen 2 significant changes with the environmental remediation, prevention and damage regulations come in. We've seen the EA be far more aggressive, starting to use Proceeds of Crime Act, as well as the legislation for recouping costs back, which has meant more people have sat up and taken notice, so it could be why that one's become more important. Staff well-being, possibly known alternatively as the S word, stress, was up until last year the single biggest lost time injury. So why that's come in now, I don't know. And water is the other one, but water will become a huge problem. Energy is a problem now, water is our next one. Specification of sustainable products and services. Anything interesting about the trend in that one? Year on year has become less relevant. It's actually dropped as far as it's gone. Which again is an interesting paradox, because surely we need to be, we've already seen the case, we've had the case made about 4 or 5 times as to what we need to be doing for energy. Yet from an operational perspective, it's still not seen as being that important. Could it be that if you look at it in the total scale of operational costs, energy costs are somewhere between 1% and slightly lower than that, between 1 and 0.3% typically for most offices. So as far as visibility goes, it's not that visible. CRC did change that, and it changed it an awful lot, particularly for a lot of the organisations we were working for, who, as far as the cost of the CRC itself, what was £12 a tonne, when they had recycling payments, that would go down to £1.20 a tonne, was insignificant. It was all about reputation. They all wanted to be in the upper quartile of performance league tables. Because most of them were paying between £120 and £250 per tonne for their supply. So an additional £12 wasn't that much. In actual fact, less than the increases we've all had to suffer over the summer, from a slightly different perspective. Carbon footprinting was another one, aspect covered. First comment on that with regards to the 2011 light blue. Dropped in significance, increased in what people are looking at though. Again, one of those strange paradoxes. Most reassuring in this is, in actual fact, two of the first time entries this year were couriers, looking at their courier carbon footprint and business travel from taxis. So we're starting to go beyond the obvious as far as carbon footprinting goes, and organisations are digging in a little bit more detail about what they're doing as far as scope of emissions they're reporting on. What is driving sustainability in the organisation? I advocated for the legal, the moral, the financial, and image. And in actual fact, with the exception of the financial one, which isn't mentioned at all, but of course is a driver therein, the top three are all there. There's been a slight shift around between legislation and corporate image over the last few years, but again, all of them have increased in significance, but the top three are those ones. What your organisation believes it should be doing, its moral, its legal, and its image aspects. And then barriers to sustainable management. What do organisations see, or what do FM see as being a problem to that? Again, quite a change here. An awful lot more identified as significant barriers, but physical constraints and financial costs have done a little bit of a shift there. And in the early days, what was the big single barrier? Seen as time. There we go. If you go back to the 2000 survey, time and lack of tools were the two biggest issues. They've now both gone. And it's actually, what can we do with our buildings? Interesting point there, if we go back to the 60% of building stock we're still going to have by 2050, and what are we going to do about generating electricity or making sure that they're still sustainable then? One more, lack of engagement across middle management, just looking at this, came in as a first-time entry, straight in at number 6, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, straight in at number 6, which again is quite interesting because it's significantly above lack of senior management commitments. It seems to be an issue at middle management level now as opposed to at senior management level, which is a strange paradox. And finally, I thought I'd put this one in. I have to put my hand up and declare an interest. I am one of those consultants who were either maligned or not this morning. I'm sure you've made your own decisions there. And said, what makes a good consultant? I'd flip that slightly and say there's two things. Part of it is not solely buying on cost, and the other one is making sure that the consultant is fit for purpose when you engage them and not realising it after you've done it. And this is another slide from the survey, which I think identifies it admirably. If you look at what's most important, and we've got end user groups, FM companies, service providers, private, public sector, large organisations and SMEs to split. We've got consultants there. Who are the only ones out of kilter with the norm? Is our group of consultants. They see carbon footprinting as being most important, where all the others are health and safety or energy. So I think is make sure you have in place the right person before you engage them, not find out you don't afterwards. So, in just finishing up, looking at where are we going in the future, these haven't really changed. Lord Redesdale mentioned one of them this morning, but these statistics came from it was the previous incumbent, it was Joan Ruddock at DEC, was at a conference. She did the introduction to the conference, and from her 10 minutes in talking, I wrote 4 things down, and these were the 4 things. The UK non-domestic public and private sector buildings account for approximately 20% of our carbon emissions, 17% in the private, about 3% in the public sector, about 1.8 million non-domestic buildings in the UK. Since 2005, the UK has been a net importer of energy raw materials. That means for the energy we generate, we've had to go elsewhere outside our own confines to find the material to generate that energy, which was one of the points made this morning. By 2020, a third of the UK's current energy generating capacity will have gone. So we're going to be 33% down on what we can generate. And by 2030, it is estimated that the UK's energy demand will have increased by between 17% and 30%. Very simple calculation there. By 2025, we could have 50% less energy supply than our demand requires. Will energy costs go up? Invariably they will. At a conference I was at earlier in the year, there was an economist from KPMG who said if you're paying £1,000 today domestically for your energy, expect to be paying £5,000 for the same energy in 2015. He did actually say after that, I hope I'm wrong. And I think everyone else in the audience was sat there thinking, yeah, we hope you're wrong too. But that's the situation we've been in. That is the situation we're in. Howard did bring up another point, though, that we do need to be aware of. As far as our generation and transmission goes, we're about 66% inefficient. Yeah? So for every watt, kilowatt, megawatt, gigawatt of energy we use, we have to generate 3. Because 60% of that is lost in getting to us. If we flip that on its head, every watt, megawatt, gigawatt we save, we actually save 3. Which does buy us a little bit of time. 1, to allow for new technology in how we generate our energy. And 2, for some of the other renewable sources to kick in however you may use them. What effect does that have? Sorry, excuse me. First of all, on energy supply. The cost of supply we talked about is going to go up. Supply and demand says that, unless we can find a very cheap alternative, or we start generating it ourselves, again, as we've talked about. What about security of supply? If we're reliant on third parties, again, this was brought up this morning, how secure will our supply be into the future? Will it become the norm when we know we can turn to a wall, press a button, and the lights will come on? What about consistency and availability of supply? Will it be there 24/7? Has been predictions as well that we could be, if the earlier figures stand true, that we could be in a time where we have energy rationing. There's only certain types of the day you can use it. When's it likely to be more rationed or cost more? You've got peak demand. We've already seen this in some European companies where they have different tariffs for different days, and they will let you know the day before what tariff is going to be on. And some is quite not very expensive. France, I think, have done this, haven't they? But they're 3-colour tariffs, and they have white days, red days, and blue days. And blue days is very high, it's 5 times the cost, so it's up to you whether you put the washing machine on, and on other days it's not, but they let you know 24 hours beforehand. Potentially could be looking at that. I'm not saying we are, it's just a possibility. And the last one is, what type of supply? Is the model of somebody else generating that energy and us using it as and when we need it the right one going forward? Or could it be that we start to look at micro-generation or other forms of local generation, again, as we've been talked about? That'll depend, and the type of use will also depend on your organisation, and that comes back to looking at your energy usage. So what is the current profile of your energy usage? Most businesses, typical top hat graph. So you've got your base load, and then as the business starts to come into gear in the morning, it increases up to a high plateau and then drops off through the afternoon. Is that going to remain? Certainly, looking at the amount of people now working in offices, they're working longer hours. So in actual fact, the base load is naturally going to go up. So does it become more of a boater than a top hat graph? What about critical energy usage? If availability of supply, if we do end up with energy rationing, what bits of your business are fundamental to your business in needing energy? Have you identified those? And what are you going to do about protecting the supply to those? Just a point to consider. And finally, what about the compliance or image areas? We've seen, I talked to that with CRC, a lot of them, it wasn't down to cost, it wasn't down to compliance with the regulations, it was down to their image. They wanted to be in the upper quartile. CRC is one thing. We've seen changes to feed-in tariffs. What about energy performance of buildings directive? People familiar with that? Energy performance certificates, display energy certificates. Again, legal requirement where EPCs are on the asset. They're actually on the building. So that looks at the asset rating for the building. Yeah, everybody happy with that? And DECs, display energy certificates, are on the operation, how much energy you're using versus total usable floor area. EPCs for any new build, sale or rent, and DECs only currently for the public sector. It did go into being rolled out to all commercial buildings as part of the carbon plan that was released in March. That, now it appears, has been taken out. although there is quite a lobby against it. It's the certificates you will have seen on cars and fridges. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. Interesting paradox, because if you consider the three elements of that, or particularly with decks, there was a 52% non-compliance in the public sector on decks in year 2. People just didn't do them. Air conditioning inspections, 250 and 12 kilowatt systems, 90% non-compliance. These are legal requirements. You're flying in the face of the law by not doing these, but people haven't done them. They've voted with their feet. Yeah, interestingly, while the requirement for decks on commercial buildings has been repealed, our experience is saying we are doing more decks for private sector customers who don't need them than we are for public sector at the moment, because they believe it's important. So there is a mismatch there between what is legal requirement, what the government is doing, and what actually business is doing. It's the same as echoed by the Operating and Financial Review, which Gordon Brown as Chancellor repealed. Is non-financial reporting, so is non-financial risk, and reporting in annual accounts. That had a consultation again last year. So that's something that looked like it's coming back. Non-financial risks, environment, workplace, 2 big non-financial risks for most organisations. How are you going to bridge that gap, is the question. It's not going to be the same for all of you. There's no blanket approach here. There's going to be different little bits of this that we need to do as organisations to make sure that our businesses are robust. It's not just about environmental sustainability, it's about corporate sustainability and how we go about meeting that. And I thought, just to lighten it at the end, I'd leave you with some quotes, of which the second one's my favourite, which is a quote from John Prescott. I don't know, some of you may have seen it before. The Green Belt is a Labour achievement and we mean to build on it. And the other one is the last one. We don't always get it right, and sometimes it's by trial and error. And that's a quote from Albert Einstein, who said, "There is not the slightest indication that energy will ever be obtainable from the atom," which again I think has been proved quite wrong. Whether it comes back to fruition in the future, but we're voting out of a moral as opposed to a scientific necessity. I don't know. But at that point, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening.